What's up, folks? As promised, this is Korin's 244mm royal blue mahogany wood handled chef knife. And if that sounds a little large for your preference, yes, this comes in an 8.2-inch chef knife, a 7-inch with a santoku blade profile, and a wildly fun to use, surprisingly affordable 5.9-inch petty. Do this. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day today to be with me. My name is Justin Khanna. Shout out to you if you're subscribed to the channel and caught the unboxing that I posted of this knife in conjunction with a bunch of other recommendations from Vincent, who is the head knife sharpener at Korin. He recommended this as one of his go-to initial favorites as a potential upgrade for your knife kit. That's on the Emulsion podcast channel. You can check it out after you watch this review. And I'm carrying some sentiments from my time at the Korin showroom into this review and into my time using this because I think I've decided this might be one of the best looking chef knives at the $150 price point. It's also got a lot of unassuming benefits that I want to share, so let's get into it. I think the like button turns blue as well if you gently tap it. This knife's steel features an 8A stain-resistant steel, which an HRC rating of 58. It's similar to like a 440 steel if any of the knives in your kit are rocking that. The handle is, yes, made from mahogany wood, and it's dyed to have this rich, deep royal blue color, and then the grain from the wood ends up adopting this dark blue. It's almost black, but it ends up getting striped all the way throughout. And comparing this handle to other knives of 8-inch length, it is a wide handle, and so that affects the ergonomics, but more on that later. This knife weighs just over 240 grams, and the spine width is just over 1/10 of an inch, which puts it a little bit beefier than, say, a Swissen or a Ninox chef knife. But there's a very important reason for that. You see, out of the box, this knife, as well as the petty version, all the knives in this line, come out of the box with an 80-20 bevel ratio. If an 80-20 edge sounds familiar, yes, that's also the name of my newsletter that I send out every week. Shout out to the almost 2,000 of you that are subscribed to that. Link in the description. If you know, you know. But with a bevel ratio like that, a knife like this almost has to have a spine that thick in order to accommodate that kind of bevel. If this was any thinner than that, or the grind was anything different than what it is, I would feel a lot of hesitancy recommending this, especially considering the steel that's used. But the edge that this knife comes with out of the box is beautiful to look at. Another thing to keep in mind, this 244mm version has a 5.1-inch long handle. I have another interesting stat to share. I'm going to use a prop to explain this next feature. So the handle of the 240mm is 5.1 inches long. There is another blue handle knife that we've reviewed on the channel before, and it's the Michelin chef knife. And the handle length is almost exactly the same size, but keep in mind, this is an 8-inch, this is a 9.4-inch. And so what you experience is the handle to blade length ratio is different on both of these. That might matter to you, it might not matter to others, but I'm just calling it out. Speaking of Korin, you do have the logo etched into the side of the blade, and this is really durable, it's not going anywhere. All right, I've barely been able to avoid inserting my opinion as we're talking about all these features, so let's pivot and talk about what this knife is like to use. Immediately picking this knife up to cut with it for the first time, I was struck by two things, the weight and again, that thickness. But it's not thick. It's thick with like maybe 2, possibly 3 Cs. But getting a few cuts in, I was realizing this is surprisingly nimble. And so I got it out and I put it on the scale. I hadn't checked the stats yet, but I realized and I put it next to the Misono UX10. They weigh exactly the same. And this doesn't happen to have any sort of fancy nickel spacer placed in the perfect position. So it's able to achieve this level of and feeling of balance in your hand without having to add anything extra. I know I mentioned the handle length to blade length ratio. I didn't notice it at all in my testing. There was never a feeling of, oh man, my hands or my fingers are gonna slip off the end of it, or I'm constantly bumping into the finger grip guard here. Speaking of other details, there's no fancy lines or design features. None of the spine is beveled. None of the under section where your middle finger hits when you do a pinch grip ends up being beveled or softened either. And any of the attachment points, it's not that they're janky or separated at all, but they're not perfectly smooth either, which I wouldn't really expect at a knife of this price point. The blade profile angle of this that leads into the heel is almost 90 degrees. It's like bam, straight down, which you kind of have to be mindful of if you're you're not ending up getting to hit that heel section when you're doing your sharpening, because otherwise if you don't go all the way through the heel of the knife, you can end up with this section that is an elevated heel, and then you have a section underneath it that's not making board contact. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk about sharpening and the edge. And at an 80-20 bevel ratio, out of the box, this is bonkers good. If you follow that ratio and this is freshly sharpened and you take this out of your bag to use it, coming from a symmetrical set of knives, or if that is exactly what your kit looked like before you got something like this, you're gonna really notice the difference. And I was skeptical too of the quality and the consistency of the edge that this was gonna have, because not a lot of makers prioritize putting an asymmetrical bevel on a knife coming out of the box, unless it does have that initial grind, or it's a very heavy weighted ratio where it's like a 90-10. Because especially for Western style knives, it's easier to just slap a symmetrical bevel on and ship it out the door, and if you want an asymmetrical edge, hey, you do it yourself. And so to have one that looks this clean and comes ready to go is a big plus for me. And at that 58 Rockwell hardness, it's easy to get an edge back on this. And remember, we're at 58 HRC, which means this responds incredibly well to a whetstone session. And because you've got that 2C thickness, you're able to have this hold up over time versus a knife that's super thin that you decided you wanted to put an asymmetrical bevel on. I know this video is about the chef knife, but I want to pivot and quickly talk about the petty knife because I love this knife. This obviously shares all the same features that I talked about earlier on in the video because it's from the same line, but this also has an 80-20 edge coming out of the box. Like, what? It's not as strikingly thick of a spine, but because you can get that edge that has that asymmetrical ratio on it, it feels so good to butcher with. And so if you're the person who has a bunch of small fish projects or lots of shellfish that you work at, this is a no-brainer. Now, who is this knife for and should you buy it? If you're a blue is my favorite color person and a knife like this would complement your blue rubber spatula and your blue peeler and your blue knife bag and your blue apron, I think at least the petty at just 89 bucks is worth the pickup. Plus, if you're intimidated by having an asymmetrical edge or you don't know where to start, any knife in this line gives you a fantastic starter pack for where to begin. And then for those of us who are visual learners, having something that you can use as a reference can be incredibly helpful, so I'm a huge fan of that. Please do check out the Sharpening series on the channel if you want more information on whetstone care. I think this makes a ton of sense, as Vincent shared, as your first upgrade knife, but for a potentially different reason after using it. Because I don't think this makes a ton of sense to use for every single thing on your prep list, with the edge that it has and the steel that it's made from. If you're the person who manages to hit your knife on a stone every other day, sure, maybe, but stick with me here on this. I think it makes more sense for this to be your first upgrade, and then you end up using your OG knife, the one that was part of your culinary school kit or as a gift from your parents or whatever, to use for butternut squash or for onions or for haché projects where you're having a lot of board contact, it's very rough and tumble. And then when it's time to transition to service and you're doing something like slicing octopus, or in prep you're doing something like a turnip brunoise, something very, very delicate and intensive where you want the sharpest knife you can have. Or you're grilling mushrooms and they're coming off the grill and you're slicing them in half on a bias. This is gonna feel like such an upgrade at just $150. Because I was certainly like that when I made my first knife upgrade. I kept it in my bag, I kind of hid it for a little while, and I wanted to bring it out when it felt like it was showtime. And early on, especially if you aren't comfortable with maintaining this edge right away, because you're not using it as often for such intensive tasks, the edge is going to stay sharper for longer, just by that nature. And then simultaneously, you're not making the decision where you just chuck your OG knife in a drawer and it gets forgotten about. You're still using that as a workhorse. You're just busting this out when it makes sense. Question of the day, because there are new folks on the channel and I have fun with these because I get to know you folks a little bit better. What is your dream knife handle color, and do you already have a knife that is rocking that color? Obviously we've got this deep blue here. My favorite is more just darker than candy apple red, and that's the color of the logo, that's the color of a bunch of other things on my website. I don't have a knife that has that color yet. I'm still searching for one, but I'm curious for you, so please comment down below and be specific because that helps me get a sense of what color you're talking about, and I think we'll start to see some favorites. Friendly reminder, links to all these knives and this entire series from Korin is down just below the like button in the description. Those will include up-to-date prices and any sort of sale that Korin's running, because at least once a year they go 20% off on every single knife on the site. Those are affiliate links which do help support the channel at no extra cost to your purchase, so thank you if you end up doing that or purchasing through Korin. Korin through any of the links that I share, and I want to send a thank you to Korin for being a channel partner. Shout out as well to their industry program. You should sign up for that if you're working professionally right now, because that gives you discounts on top of the sales sometimes. Thanks so much for your attention. My name is Justin Khanna. Have a good one.